Okay, so I'm going to assume that the audience is able to see us now. I'm going to start our introductions. Welcome, everyone. My name is Rodney Hakim, and I am happy to invite you to join us here for tonight's deep dive discussion, New York Shakespeare deep dive discussion about producing Shakespeare on Broadway and beyond. We have four fantastic guests joining us here tonight. We have Stewart F. Lane of BroadwayHD. Hello, Stewart.
Hey, it's great to be here tonight. Thank you.
We have Pat Addis of Desperate Measures, the musical. And
the best musical of Shakespeare measured.
The best, sure. The best. And Pat is also under the guise of Magda Katz. Don't let that fool you. That this is Pat Addis herself. We have Deborah Ann Bird of multiple outfits of Big Wing and Soar Productions, of the Harlem Shakespeare Festival, and of Becoming Othello. Hello, Deborah.
Hello there.
And we have Nathan Winkelstein of the Red Bull Theater. Hello, Nathan.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Sure. So for those who are joining us for the first time, my name is Rodney Hakim, and what New York Shakespeare is all about, we are dedicated to bring you as much as we can of what is happening as it relates to Shakespeare here in New York, whether it is stage performances, film screenings, book readings, whatever the case may be. If it is related to Shakespeare, we try to bring as much of that content to you as we can across our social media feeds here on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, YouTube, and pretty much anywhere else. Tonight, we are talking about Shakespeare as it pertains to Broadway, Broadway, off-Broadway, pretty much anywhere where there's some pretty major theater here in New York, there is some Shakespeare. And what we want to explore tonight is, where is Shakespeare being done? What does it look like when it's being done on Broadway or off-Broadway? And some more questions pertaining to that. And that is a lovely jingle. I wonder, it doesn't sound very Shakespearean, but it's a lovely jingle nonetheless. Okay, so as we get started here tonight, we all know that we are coming off of a significant shutdown of theaters in New York. Broadway in particular has been shut down for about a year and some change, almost about a year and a half. And many theaters are slated to reopen in just about a couple of weeks, in the middle of September. So we'll be talking to some of the people who are some of the main players in the New York Shakespeare scene. Let us introduce our panelists in a little bit more depth. I'll ask each of you to give us about a minute or two just to tell us and tell the audience about who you are, what your company is all about, and some of your top credits. Stewart Lane, I think if we asked you to give us a rundown of some of your credits, that would take our full hour here. You are a multiple award-winning producer of many, many Broadway shows. And the one that I think of in particular that is most germane to our discussion is you produced about 7 or 8 years ago, you produced a version of Romeo and Juliet on Broadway with a young Orlando Bloom and Condola Rashad in the lead roles.
I certainly did, and it was a exciting production to do, trying to combine sort of a movie celebrities with a Shakespearean theme for a Broadway audience. So that was challenging, but I have to tell you, the fan base was there, and they did show up for Orlando. And Condola was sort of just starting her career. I think this was just before she did Billions. So right. She was a talented actress as she was, but Orlando really anchored that. In fact, we HD and actually digitally captured the website, as we do have Broadway in place. In fact, one of our favorite is Patrick Stewart, which is so frightening. Even my children couldn't sit through it.
Okay, so Stewart, he is the producer of many, many Broadway shows. He is the co-executive of BroadwayHD, which is an on-demand streaming service that brings you the best of Broadway, brings you his own productions and many, many others. Hundreds, I think, how many, the last time we spoke, it was what, 500 titles are up there on BroadwayHD at this point?
Well, over 350 now.
Yeah. Okay. So quite a number of Broadway productions spanning the last couple of decades, right?
Well, we include actually some of the more interesting things are like the original production of Death of a Salesman with Lee J. Cobb. You got Gilbert and Sullivan with that one with Lynn. And then we have contemporary shows like 42nd Street that we shot in London, and we have shows like Memphis, and a lot of musicals and exciting stuff, and a lot of things coming in the fall. Big fall season coming up, so it's very exciting for us here at Broadway HD.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, let us turn over to our friend Pat Addis. Pat, you've been a producer for a long time here in the city. You have many awards and many wonderful shows to your credit. And the show that I became acquainted with you by is the one we mentioned right at the top. It's Desperate Measures, which is a takeoff on Measure for Measure, set into a musical in the Old West.
That's true. And anybody who has studied Measure for Measure will see the train of thought of the man in charge who wants the young nun to be bedded down, same thing, and how it's just wonderful to see the parallel to the Measure for Measure, and it's done in iambic pentameter. Our Peter Kellogg is just a brilliant writer, and it's just fabulous, and it's fun. And I don't know anybody who's seen the show that hasn't liked it. So we're hoping, COVID has put us on hold. I'm hoping to go to Hawaii to see a production January 13th. And there's one going this weekend in Springfield, Missouri. But the COVID has really pushed it back, so that's very sad. And I worked with Stu on 39 Steps, which was a wonderful play that has nothing to do with Shakespeare. But anyway, I saw Desperate Measures at the York Theater, and I just had to produce it. It's just the best musical ever, and it only has 6 characters, so it's not too expensive to produce. And I want to proselytize.
Yeah.
Anyway,
we'll be talking about that.
Thank you for having me and allowing me to talk about Desperate Measures.
Sure. Okay.
I just love the show so much.
I loved it too. It's one of my favorite things I've seen in the past 5 or 6 years. It's really a wonderful show.
And Pat, keep in mind, we'd like to have that for Broadway HD. It's really a good production.
We're facilitating Broadway deals right here in front of you. Okay, Deborah Ann Bird, our friend from the Harlem Shakespeare Festival and from her one-woman show, Becoming Othello. Hello, Deborah.
Hello there, how are you?
I'm good. We've spoken a couple of times, Deborah, and I just rewatched your one-woman show, Becoming Othello, which is your autobiographical one-woman opus about your journey into learning about Shakespeare and taking on one of the most challenging roles in the Shakespeare opus, which is Othello himself, and how you've been touring with that for the last year or so.
Yeah, I started out with a workshop, what I was calling a first looks tour. I was just trying to see if the script would work. We started out at Stratford-upon-Avon in the UK at the Birthplace Trust, and moved on to Dallas and then Arizona. And then COVID struck, and that means that everything had to shut down. We were scheduled to do more Flagstaff, Arizona, and Harrisburg, PA, and Paradise Shakespeare in the Bahamas, and Prague, and on and on. We had like 13 places we were supposed to go, but the COVID, of course, shut it all down. We've recently just opened back up. We did an outdoor performance at the Shakespeare and Company in the Berkshires in Lenox, Massachusetts. And then Lincoln Center.
Right, you were back in New York after an extended
Lincoln
time
Center
away.
for a day, restart stages. That was really wonderful. And I just returned yesterday from was it yesterday? Yes, yesterday from Boise at the BIPOC, first annual BIPOC Playwrights Festival in Boise, Idaho. And the show went really, really well out there. And so we're seeing what's next. Next United Solo Theater Festival in November in New York. And then on to Prague if the world remains open enough. And then back to Pennsylvania and Indiana and Skidmore College and things like that.
So you have many, many stops ahead of you. And let us introduce once more our final guest of the evening, and that is Nathan Winkelstein of the Red Bull Theater. You are the Associate Artistic Director over with J.C. Berger at the Red Bull Theater.
Yeah, that's correct. So I'm the only one here with no power.
You have power.
But yeah, I'm the associate AD over at Red Bull Theater, which for those of you who don't know, we're an off-Broadway company based in New York City. We bring rarely seen classics to life. That's kind of the center of our mission. And then really at the core of our mission is Jacobean theater. So that's Shakespeare, the second half of Shakespeare's canon, along with a lot of his contemporaries. And we've been bringing those shows to Off-Broadway for 15 years as a company. I've been around for 5 of those. And took a long hiatus, did a whole lot online. Very much looking forward to going back to doing it live. And we are, our next one is not Shakespeare, but his kind of one of his 2 greatest contemporaries, Ben Jonson, wrote a famous play called The Alchemist. And we are doing a new adaptation of that, written by Jeffrey Hatcher in the fall at New World Stages. So that's where we're at in our programming as we move forward. And Deborah, I am utterly embarrassed that I haven't heard about your show, and we need to talk about it more because it sounds unfreaking believable.
Don't be embarrassed. I mean, a lot of people haven't heard about it. It's brand new, and we were just trying to get it out there when everything got shut down. So we look forward to trying to see what kind of run it'll get in New York. We don't know yet, but we're talking to some people to see how to make that work.
Well, we should chat. See,
Absolutely.
All the different ways that this ties people together. But yeah,
there you go. And before we really get into the discussion of what producing is all about and what goes into producing a show, I just want for those of us, the viewers in the audience who might not be as familiar with the distinctions between the 4 of you, why don't you explain for us what are the distinctions between the different levels of theater in New York? There's Broadway, there's off-Broadway, there's off-Broadway, but then there are some other variations as well that don't really fit so neatly into that scheme. So why don't you tell us, just whoever wants to jump in, what is the breakdown between Broadway and off-Broadway? What's the difference?
Well, money, number 1.
Money.
Yes.
So I can say, Broadway, when you look at the entertainment industry, Broadway is basically used to be, and for many years was the poor stepchild of the industry itself. There's television that makes a lot of money, movies that give you fame, and then there was like theater where like you made no money. We're all busy bees trying to create things, but with very, very little money involved. And then something unusual happened. Shows didn't run just 5 or 6 years. They started running decades. They started running 17 years. All of a sudden, they're grossing more than movies were grossing. So the attention that it started to get, instead of 1 page in the back of Variety, they were getting several pages now. And the Broadway itself, and mind you, it's a very limited market to begin with. So it's always been the same for 30 years. Women buying the tickets, better educated women, higher economic bracket. They're the ones who have really been supporting the major ticket buyers of the theater. And as a result, we've been able to survive all this time. I think that the idea of bringing Shakespeare to the stage probably involves more like star power and creativity to making it innovative. But the difference between Broadway and off-Broadway, frankly, also it deals with creativity and ingenuity. Off-Broadway gives you a lot more room to do exciting, new, experimental things at a lower cost than, say, Broadway does. So within that kind of realm of live theater, with Broadway being the penultimate high end. You've got the experimental side. I mean, during the 60s, all the exciting theater for me was going on off Broadway, the National Lampoons, the Jacques Brels. Those were exciting things. Broadway was a little conventional. So I think that off-Broadway gives you a chance to really experiment. Off-Broadway is a great place for young and new playwrights and directors to really start getting a niche. So that you can see there's kind of a system that's built in there of growth and development. That's how I feel the difference is.
Pat?
Well, I agree mostly with what Stewart said, but off-Broadway now is more for people who really love the theater. Broadway is more for tourists. And so there is a difference, and you do have different audiences. And then there are also a lot of companies that put on things like Nathan's company. And there are a lot of different companies that put out a lot of wonderful things, but they're on off-Broadway. And I think if you really love theater, off-Broadway is really where it's at. Off-Broadway, a lot of that is very experimental, and it also has an audience. We have to train more people to go to the theater. England, London, the people really love theater, and it's an essential part of their life. In New York, it's not an essential part of many people's lives, and particularly younger people. We've got to get them to love theater. And I'm not sure how to do that, but if anybody does, I think it's very, very important that we get young people into theaters. And there are different shows that are, and I don't mean things like Drunk Shakespeare either, but that's a beginning. I like to think of it as having a higher quality than that, but whatever, I think it's very important that we target young people and get them in the theater. And I don't know exactly how to do that. I think Peter Avery, who works with the public schools, and then the Schuberts, they do a lot to promote theater for kids, but that's only for kids. I'm talking about young adults who have so much money and they rather spend it at bars drinking. Now, so I just hope that this group here can think of some ways to bring more theater to young people.
Well, okay. may I say,
I will
Broadway HD digitally captures live shows with audiences in real time, and we're able to democratize just what you're saying, Pat. So it brings Broadway for an economical. We do geography barriers and financial barriers to bring it to people like young people who can't afford $150 to see a Broadway musical. We're able to do it for $8.99 a month.
So Nathan, you guys run an off-Broadway theater, and you guys are, of course, COVID accepted, you guys are running a pretty busy schedule throughout the year, and it's all based on Shakespeare and the classics, Shakespeare and his contemporaries. Would you define your status as an off-Broadway theater as the size of your house as opposed to a Broadway house? Or is it just the style of work that you do? How would you define that?
Well, the most fundamental difference, and none of this is completely rigid, right? But the most fundamental difference is that Broadway, the vast majority of Broadway is for profit. The vast majority of off-Broadway, including Red Bull Theater, is not for profit. So that means that if we do well in a given season, 50% of the income, 50% of our expenses is covered by earned income. The other 50% is by donors. And so whether small or large. And so that's just an entirely different model. And it is in some ways limiting and in some ways liberating, because you don't have to, you can be mission driven in a very particular way, where if you have the supporters who go, no, we believe that this show is important to be shown, even though we know we're going to take a bath financially, you can do that, whereas that just logistically can't happen in for-profit Broadway. So it just allows a very different mission, and it requires the cultivation of a donor base, both large form donors and small form donors. And what we really learned over COVID, which was very interesting, we haven't quite seen how it's going to progress back into real spaces together, is that the small donor world of online work, where our audiences were 10 times the size, but we're donating an average of $5 or $10, actually gave us more income than $75 tickets in a 199 seat space. So it was a very interesting thing to learn, and we're continuing to learn how to develop that. But so I would describe Off-Broadway as being somewhat liberated, not by any means completely, somewhat liberated from the need to pick the most profitable title, because we have a donor support base that can believe in the worth of a project. And that allows a mission-driven theater to, I mean, Red Bull Theater could only exist in New York, right? Our mission is quite niche. We do the weird ones. Not only do we do classical theater, we do the weird classical theater. Mm-hmm. So that you have to have a market like New York City where something that niche could still have the size of an off-Broadway house. So that would be the biggest difference, that the biggest gap that I see between those two. And then the biggest gap that I see between off-Broadway and off-Broadway is really contract. Is really off-Broadway barely pays a living wage to their actors and their designers and everything else. Off-Broadway, with almost no exception, is not doing that. They don't have the funding yet. That is being done purely for the love and for, I hate this word, the exposure, but for the creation in that. So there's that's also a significant tier jump. We're obviously not paying nearly as much as Broadway, but we are on full weekly equity pay that gives health insurance and all of that stuff. I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, other panelists, but with the exception of like a showcase code, I don't think Off-Broadway ever touches full equity contracts, because once they're doing that, they would be defined as Off-Broadway.
It's very few and far between. I've talked to a lot of off-Broadway companies over the years, and that very few, if any of them, are fully equity, and they follow that level of code. Deborah, your company, the Harlem Shakespeare Company, is that
Harlem Shakespeare has done off-Broadway for a long time, and for the most part, like Nathan was saying, like Pat was saying, it is very you can get to be even more experimental. Or if folks don't know or understand what it is that you do, it is a great space to get an introduction to the community. Takeaway In-Store Productions and Harlem Shakespeare Festival was founded to give classically trained actors of color center stage opportunities. And so we found that it was a good place, a great place to just get our foot in the door, to just get folks to come and see and understand without costing way too much more money than we actually had. Of course, we were not for profit as well, and getting donor money and government money. And then individual donors as well. So, and some ticket sales, but ticket sales is never, ever enough really to pay for what it costs even to run an off-Broadway project. And then with equity, when you do use, what is that lovely thing, the showcase code, it can't be more than a certain amount of money. You can't have more than like 30,000, or it grew over the years. But it can't cost more than a certain thing, because the actors are not getting a regular salary and pension and health. They are getting exposure. They are getting an opportunity to practice their craft. And then you move on to the next level, which is the off-Broadway contracts, hopefully at some of the sister organizations or some of our other peers. That's what, we're just like a starting point for these artists to be known, to be seen, to hone their skills, to practice their craft. And it's been working out for our actors. We see them going to off-Broadway and even Broadway, and then onto television and film as well. So we would just been grateful just to be the starting point. You come out of college, you need somewhere to start. And we have been that for a lot of artists.
So Stewart and Pat, you two being the representatives in this discussion of the Broadway level of production, talk to us about whether the specific Shakespeare productions you worked on, Romeo and Juliet or Desperate Measures, or even just some of the other things that you produced.
There is something I would like to say.
Ahead,
I don't have the advantage that Red Bull and Harlem Shakespeare has. I was an independent producer, and it's very costly and it's very difficult to make money off Broadway as it is on Broadway, because you have all these extras, and I'm not too enamored with a lot of the publicity people and all of the traps that you get into, and it's very, very expensive to produce. And one of the things that
Pat, was Desperate Measures off Broadway or
off
Broadway? Off Broadway.
That was off Broadway. Yes, I mean, I have produced on Broadway, and you know, it's very difficult to make a profit. You either make a killing or you don't. And one thing that I will say on a show that Stu and I was on, 39 Steps, they made a mistake, I thought. We were on Broadway. First we were at the Court Theater, and then we moved to the Helen Hayes. And then the Helen Hayes wanted another show to come in because they thought they were going to get a Tony, blah, blah. And 39 Steps did something that I did not approve of. They moved to off-Broadway. And that was a very unusual thing, to have a show move from Broadway to off-Broadway. It did not work because your expenses are almost the same, and you don't have, well, I'm not going to go into all the mistakes they made. I was the one producer who defected because I wanted to do Promises instead.
But it seems to me like one of the issues here is the level of capitalization that you have to put forward to put on a show, whether off-Broadway, off-Broadway, or at the highest level at Broadway. It seems like you have to raise a tremendous amount of funding to put together a show. What level of funding, without getting into specific dollar amounts, but how difficult is it to put together the funds to put on, let's say you want to do any kind of Broadway show, whether it's a musical, whether it's Shakespeare, whatever it is, how difficult is it to put that funding together?
The Shakespeare shows that I've done on Broadway, and besides Romeo and Juliet with Orlando Bloom and Condola Rashad, I also did The Merchant of Venice with Al Pacino. So again, we're dealing with, well, people know the titles of Shakespeare, but then you've got star power to back it up, and we got the reviews on both the shows. So you've got a lot going for you when you're trying to sell Shakespeare on a commercial level. You probably actually could sell Shakespeare better in the nonprofit arena than you can in the commercial theater, because it is that much harder. On Broadway HD, our biggest sellers are the Broadway musicals, the 42nd Streets and the Memphises and the King and I's that have been done. Those are the big sellers. Once in a while, if you get Patrick Stewart or you get Al Pacino, you can do a Shakespeare that really makes money in the commercial venue. Off-Broadway gives you a lot more leeway to experiment with things and try different things without having to spend $15 to $20 to $30 million to mount it.
So if you want to mount a production, whether it's a musical, whether it's whatever, on Broadway, that's the highest tier, that's the highest level of, in terms of the largest audience, you're going to bring in the largest gamble, so to speak, of outlay of money that you're putting out to put the production together, but also potentially the return in ticket sales in terms of recognition, in terms of raising the status of the company they're working with. Do you have to, as you said, Stu, do you have to have that Al Pacino, that Patrick Stewart, do you have to have the above the marquee star to make a show like that happen?
No, you try and hedge your bets with this. I used to compare doing a Broadway show with like wildcatting for oil. You bring in the geology expert who's the best, you get the equipment that's the best, and you go, okay, let's drill here. and you drill and you go, oh, dry hole. Sorry, let's try over here. And the same thing with a Broadway show. You'll bring in the best director, choreographer, book writer, and still the show doesn't work. What happened? I did I'm going to say several shows where I had the cream of the crop of Broadway and the show didn't fly. So, you just never know is the answer. And it's 1 out of 5 shows breaks even in our business. Forget making money.
One out of 5 shows.
Right. So it's a gamble. It's a gamble, but we do it because we love it. There's a high, you can get a high reward, especially today when you have shows that run 20 years. I mean, that's an amazing gross for any business. So there are certain certain things that make it more appealing now than it did, say, 30 or 40, even 40 years ago. Because I've been doing this a long time. So, I can go back that far.
But Nathan, for a company like yours, that your whole identity is based on the classics, and as you mentioned early on, you have a mixture of funding, whether it's audience support or some different donors, and you're a not-for-profit organization, so there's a little bit less pressure in terms of the amount of funding that you have to raise, I would suppose. But does the matter of funding, does that impact the choices that you guys make in terms of how you select your shows? Or is it just that, you guys have your mission and you have your artistic pride that I want to do this and I want to do that, and this is what we want to put forward? Or is there some kind of monetary decision-making that's involved?
There's always monetary decision-making involved. If anyone claims there isn't, they're lying. I'll say, like, with Red Bull Theater, we could probably, our board would probably go along with us doing any show if we could justify it artistically. But if we take a worse bath than we're expecting to take, and by the way, like every off-Broadway show we do, we're budgeting in a huge loss. But that's still a number that you have to make. That loss is still a number that you have to make. And so all of the decisions about names and titles and stuff, it all goes into that. And if you fall under that, that might cost you a second show in a season. You might not have the ability to do more art because you still need money. And so yeah, no, it's extremely, and when a show is a real big success for an off-Broadway company like the Government Inspector was for us, that then gives you the ability to do more shows, to do more theater. So it's always a constant balancing act of yeah, sure, maybe Fletcher's King and No King would be a decent production, but would anybody come? And if nobody comes to that, we're burned. Or do we have that one star who really wants to do this show? And would that be enough to get us to the point that we think that we could do this while still putting on what we want? So it's always a balance. It's just a different balance. The weight is different.
So even on the off-Broadway level that you guys are at with the Red Bull Theater, it is still star-based. The production you were talking about was with, I believe, with Michael Urie, who is known for his work on Broadway, and also you had a couple of other prominent names in the New York scene. So
I think that, look, a name helps. You also, I'm sure this is true on Broadway as well. The New York Times is incredibly important. How that review goes down. Michael Urie is a big name and he's a wonderful man. He put on an unbelievable performance. What sold that show was that he was great, not that he was Michael Urie. Now the fact that he is Michael Urie helps to explain why he's great. Right? It's why I sometimes push back against this idea of you need a name. People have become names for reasons. They've become names because they're amazing. Oftentimes. So I don't think, and I'd be curious to hear how the people producing on Broadway feel about this. I think there's this idea that people are compromising their integrity when they go after names. We're not. They're incredible. We're going after them because they're amazing. It helps that they sell tickets, but we're not compromising the art.
Nathan, we're not compromising. We're hedging our bets.
Yeah, well, that helps too. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, we're not compromising. Putting Denzel Washington into Julius Caesar interesting artistically and commercially, but yeah, it's just hedging your bets. I mean, it's such a gamble to begin with. We figured that's just a way of lessening the odds against you.
But also, let's all live and be well and have Denzel Washington and Julius Caesar, right? Like, it's also amazing that could happen. Like, I just find myself more exhilarated by, but you're absolutely right, that it also does hedge the bets, because people might come see that name regardless of a review.
So Pat, let's talk about your show, Desperate Measures. So that was a show that had no one that was really a name person in there. And the only real name attached to it, as far as I know anyway, and the only really name attached to it is Shakespeare. The fact that it's a musical based on Shakespeare. Of course, your writer, Peter Kellogg.
It's not a model that I recommend people using. One of the things I also might add is that whether you're on Broadway or off Broadway, when you put an ad in the New York Times or wherever you put your ad, it costs you the same, whether you're off Broadway or on Broadway. Everything costs you the same, your PR, everything. So therefore, it's a lot more difficult to make money on off Broadway because when you have a company like Nathan, you have benefactors all the time and you have a board. In my case, with Desperate Measures, I had a leading producer who never coughed up the money that she was supposed to, and kept promising and promising and promising, but it never came up. And so these are the things that are very difficult in producing, and you never know what is going to happen. I mean, we've all been hit by COVID. So we certainly didn't know what was going to happen. And for Desperate Measures, we got canceled all over the country, and now it's coming back. And we have, as I think I mentioned, this performance next weekend in Springfield, Missouri. And I'm going to Hawaii, January 13th, assuming that the Delta variant won't keep me away from Hawaii, because we already were supposed to be in Hawaii. So right. It's, and I think Broadway at this point is very iffy. I don't know about you, Stewart, but I think it's all very iffy. Nobody knows and nobody can predict exactly what's going to happen.
Broadway's scheduled to reopen in early to mid-September. Some theaters are scheduled to go back up in around September 14th, others a week later. There's Sixth Musical, which is loosely based on something Shakespearean. It's related to the wives.
Well, what's interesting about it is that people were supposed to open in October, November, December, and everybody kept pushing their dates closer and closer and closer to open up sooner. So I don't know whether that's going to work. I don't know. The first one up is Passover, and Passover started with their pre-Broadway, and they've already upped their date to open sooner.
Now, is the impetus there?
Nathan,
is the impetus for pushing the dates sooner? Is the idea that you want to open your theaters faster just to get ticket sales, to get some cash flow? Is that the idea? Is that you've been sitting dormant for so long and you need to open as soon as you can to invigorate your theater with some influx of audience members to get yourself active again? Or what's the idea behind it?
Stu, maybe you can answer that question.
Well, you're talking about all the actors, the musicians, the people who deal with live performances have been out of work for a year and a half with no safety net. There's a certain desire and I'm not going to say desperation, but a goal to make a living because they have children. They got to pay college tuition and they have kids and families to feed. There's a certain practical side to it. We want the shows to go on. We want the Broadway to start. Protocols are now in place. The variant virus is, the Delta, it's an issue, something that we can't ignore. But we're going to move forward with the optimism that with the vaccine, I said earlier that the people who go to the theater are better educated, higher economic brackets. Frankly, they've been vaccinated for the most part, if not all, and certainly they've been educated enough to not carry a gun into the theater. So no guns, no, they're all vaccinated. They'll wear masks. It's probably the safest place you could be in New York is in the Times Square area. And I think that that bodes well for the theater industry, especially initially when you're dealing with the tri-state area, which is our customers to begin with. Once that's established, the tourists will start coming in as the virus peters out. But it is an unknown factor, and that really is the question that's on the table. That's the elephant in the room.
That's the $1 million question, right? Is what's going to be with the coronavirus situation. Yeah. Deborah, you were as you mentioned earlier on, you were planning a big tour of your one-woman show, Becoming a Fellow, around the U.S. And I think you were you were stationed in Arizona for several months because you did a performance there and you just couldn't get out. You were quarantined there for quite a while.
I was quarantined there for a while, but at first, of course, none of us knew or understood what wait a moment or hold on a moment really meant. And so we were held out hope that maybe at the end of March, we'd be able to go again. And then once we knew that that wasn't going to happen, then we were waiting for June because I was supposed to perform at the TCG, the Theater Communications Group, was scheduled to be in Arizona, and I was supposed to do a show then. And of course, we know that didn't happen. And so, we took to Zoom. We took to Zoom and started to produce shows there. Some of our best loved things, we just said, let's do The Importance of Being Earnest, set in 1920 Harlem. Let's do all-female Othello again. Let's see what happens when we do it on Zoom. And so Harlem Shakes just pivoted and started to produce shows online and made it work that way until such a time as, and then I had a grant in New York City to do a small run at the Center at West Park. And when COVID happened, Center at West Park, they pivoted and asked the city of New York for a media grant. And so everyone who was in residence was able to go on their stages and bring in a camera crew and film the show. And
you
so
did your show there solo with no audience.
We did a solo with no audience and 3 cameras, and we shot the show. And now I have the show in the can. And so that has been going around to colleges and Shakespeare festivals, and that's how I've been able to get Becoming Othello word out there. And also it garnered reviews from across the land because of they saw it as part of people's season. There were seasons in California where it became a part. It was in Elm Shakespeare. Up here, where am I, in Connecticut or something? Right. And so it started to go across the land by not HD, but streaming.
Well, I think based on the look on Stewart's face, I think Broadway HD might be the next destination for.
Exactly. That sounds perfect for what we'd be looking for, something like that. That's 3 camera shoot, a 1-person show.
Yeah,
yes, definitely.
Live on the stage.
Yes.
At the Center at West Park, and it went well.
I think we've made about 4 deals throughout the course of this program thus far. So Nathan, you guys also pivoted into the online realm in the past year. You guys did a ton of Zoom readings and productions. I remember you guys did the show with we've spoken to him a bunch of times. Keith Hamilton Cobb, American Moor. You guys did that. You had your month of Othello a few months ago. You had a lot of programming over the past year that everyone was in hiatus and hibernation. You guys did a ton of content. Has that model, you mentioned how the model showed you a new avenue of producing funding from the audience where the small $5, $10 donations were as significant, if not more significant, than some of the other methods you had employed before. But do you think going forward that this new avenue that Deborah's talking about, the Zoom and YouTube, that is something that's going to be part of your programming going forward?
Certainly this year, And I think the short answer is yes. The longer answer is probably the fully produced Zoom reading where people are in isolation and it is a replacement for live performance is probably going to fade. Not exactly what Deborah described, where like Deborah's able to do the whole show with a 3-camera shoot on a stage. It's not people in boxes doing Zoom. I think I think once we have live theater to attend, that will probably garner less interest. But I think that for Red Bull, a big part of our mission is accessing these plays that maybe people have never heard before and getting 11 or 12 really high quality actors from around the country to just get on Zoom and not pretend they're doing anything other than doing a good read of a play is actually still of use when you're exploring a play, when you're trying to hear a play for the first time and you'd rather, instead of reading it yourself, you'd rather hear, name the actor. You'd rather hear Patrick Page and J.O. Sanders and Tamara Tooney and Keith, all read it for you. I think that will continue. Our Podversation series where we interview people and talk about various Shakespeare monologues and stuff will continue. These seminars that you discussed, the Othello 2020 that we did, we're doing a similar one coming up on an all BIPOC Pericles reading, and then around that is also a kind of a gateway program that we're using to explore some ideas about Pericles, and we're doing it with some Spanish Commedia, new translations as well. So very much the how do we explore, get new ideas out there, use talents from all across the country to connect, rather than this is a performance for pure entertainment. I'm not sure how much more of that will continue. But this is something for us all to learn more about this thing that we all care about. That aspect of it, I think, is very valuable and will continue to be so.
So could this be something that we kind of ties into what Pat was talking about earlier on about we have to find a way to connect to the younger audience and to get the word out there? Could it be that the things that you guys, that's ever what you're doing with all of the online manifestations of your show, that Nathan, what you guys are doing with all the conversations and all the other programming around the shows, that is filling in some of the ways of attracting the audience, of pulling in the online audience that is waiting for something to happen?
I think that it's, yeah, I think that Deborah's, frankly, if I'm being honest, I think Deborah's work is probably better attuned for bringing in younger audiences. I think that our work, it depends on the project. I'm not sure how many 20-year-olds are going to be like, a new translation of a Sor Juana play. Wow. I'm not entirely certain that they're the target there. But one thing that, but the Podversations, for example, it's much easier to get a Patrick Page or a Dennis O'Hare or a Dion Johnstone or Lisa Harrow or whoever for 1 hour on Zoom or to discuss a passage from Shakespeare, and they may have followings from TV or wherever or outside of it who come because it's an opportunity to see them speak. And then they go, wow, I didn't realize that, Hamish Linklater and Lily Rabe were so obsessed with Shakespeare. Maybe Shakespeare's cool. And you sort of start to get it that way. So I think that it's all about developing audiences, whether that's widthwise across various groups or age or whatever, where I do think it has a lot of access.
Well, Broadway HD is able to take shows from Broadway, West End, and Off-Broadway. I mean, we have shows that Michael Urie directed, like Doug, and we've got Off-Broadway shows that didn't have any kind of exposure because, New York audiences are very specific, but they might work in Oklahoma, they might work in Texas, they might work in the rest of on it. So a show like First Date, which I happen to have loved, was a charming Broadway musical that didn't quite charm the critics. Yet a lot of value there. It's one of our top watch shows on our website. But the idea that we can afford to take off-Broadway shows, and in fact, this month we're putting on Women Behind Bars, which was a Tom Iron musical, that was a play that was done at the Truck and Warehouse Company back in the late 60s. And I'm old enough to have seen it. That's how I know. And but again, stuff that wouldn't get mainstream. So we're making it accessible. We're making it affordable, which I think is really important. And you don't have to come to New York to see it. You can watch it at home when you want to, how you want to.
So Stewart,
you know what? I think that it's very important that we have live. People need to be live in the theater. Stewart, I mean, it's wonderful what you're doing, but we need live theater. Also, I might say one of the problems with Zoom is that a lot of Zoom shows have been horrible and disgusting, and very unprofessional. So I don't think that that's going to help just Zooming things. It's one thing like Deborah has a one-person show and it doesn't matter, but I mean, I've seen Zoom shows where people were supposed to be in the same room with one another, and one has the background of a kitchen and the other one has the background of a waterfall. I mean, I'm being a little ridiculous, but I mean.
You're absolutely right, but you haven't seen those shows on Broadway HD. So we have some of those shows really done professionally. Please take a look.
And I will say, first of all, Stewart, by the way, I totally agree. I agree with all the parts here, right? Like live theater is live for a reason. There is something about it being live that is super important. There's also the other piece, since this seems to be the Michael Urie conversation, is like, I literally just got back at 3 a.m. From directing him in Zoo Story. And it was an example of a thing where I was sitting there, and it was just for a few nights because he's doing chicken and biscuits and a million things. And I was sitting there going, it's amazing, first of all, being back in a live theater and watching Michael Urie and his partner Ryan Spahn performing in this play. It's beautiful. I also wish more people could see it. Yes. So it's like, so I think it's both. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think both things can happen. And I do think Zoom can be done in relatively high tech. You just have to pay for it. You have to have a green screen. You have to have an external microphone. You have to have a ring light. You have to have an HD camera. You have to do the whole game. But you can make it work.
So, Deborah, you and Pat might be the ones who might be able to advise us on this issue. When we're talking about the economics of a show, whether it's Broadway, off-Broadway, off-Broadway, it seems like a significant aspect of that is the fact that after the show ends its run in New York City, that it has a touring segment to its run. Deborah, you took your show, your one-woman show that started here, and you took it around the US. Of course, you had the stoppage because of COVID, but now you're back, and you were just back in New York, and you're back in Boise, Idaho, and all the places that you are. How important is that, Pat, to you as well with Desperate Measures? How important is it for you all, or generally speaking, for that touring segment of a show to extend the lifespan and continue to make it extend the reach of the show to a wider audience?
Yeah, I think that, Pat is more of an expert on it than I am because I'm pretty much just getting started. But at the same time, I understand that, of course, we did our all-female Othello here in New York City and off-Broadway. But that reach was just that. And once we were able to take it to Arizona and then take it somewhere else, it did have a wider audience, a bigger audience. More people understood what it was. The funds came differently as well. Doing the show in New York, even becoming Othello, we didn't have a real run yet in New York City, but just being able to get out of town with it in Arizona, and as well as up in Shakespeare and Company in the Berkshires, I haven't, maybe because it is Shakespeare and Company, I haven't experienced getting those kinds of funds that the show made up at Shakespeare and Company on any of my shows in New York City. But I understand that Shakespeare and Company is a well-oiled machine. But for a new show that is a solo show with an unknown artist, I'm not going to say I'm totally unknown, but I'm unknown enough. It did pretty well. And so there are a lot of avenues to make funds when you leave the nest. And my nest is New York. And I see how and then also you can get not that you can't get national reviews in New York City, but I didn't start here. I started out. And then I'm going to come the other way around and come back to New York. But I didn't want to start in New York and in the middle of COVID and theater's not open yet and all of that. So it's just been a really interesting journey so far. And being able to take the show across the nation. And I think that it's just getting a lot more attention everywhere you go, and more people are reached, and more people are touched, and more people are inspired. And so I look forward to continuing this touring thing that I'm doing, and then coming back to New York and seeing what kind of run we can do.
How about you, Pat? With you mentioned that you guys are in Hawaii, you're in Missouri, you're all over the place. What is the significance of that aspect of extending a show's lifespan with the touring?
I think that Desperate Measures needs to be put up in England, I think, and Canada. So I think that it has a very good, healthy life. Unfortunately, as I said, COVID aborted all the places that we were going, and hopefully they'll all come back again. They're all scheduled for 2022. So hopefully we'll be able to, rebirth it. It's kind of difficult, but, it's a wonderful musical. I have a question for Deborah. Would you allow somebody else to play your part?
Sure. Just let me give me about a year. Let me get old and tired. and because I wrote the solo show, so I can, as an actor person as well. And so I'm sure at some point someone's going to say, oh, I want to play that role. And I'll say, sure, go ahead. It's just going to require a whole lot of vulnerability and a whole lot of understanding Shakespeare's text.
I think
another question, Pat, is some of the things that go in addition to the tour, like you have the CD of the original cast recording. How important is that into all the different things, the T-shirts and all the different merchandise?
I've got a lot of that. If you want a T-shirt, I have. They're all in my apartment. I've got T-shirts, I've got mugs, I've got the whole caboodle. And no, nobody really knows because of COVID. We're all guessing. We don't know what's going to happen. Hopefully, we were supposed to be in some Shakespeare festivals, which makes really good sense, but they all got canceled. And, I just hope that we are able to weather the storm and be able to really produce stuff again. And not only Desperate Measures, but a lot of other things. It's just that everybody loves Desperate Measures. It's just one of those things, it's like a recipe. You put all the ingredients in and you stir it up and you hope it's going to work. Well, the recipe for Desperate Measures just works. It's just amazing how the show, of all the shows I've ever produced. I mean, I started with Little Women. I've done Promises, Passing Strange, but Desperate Measures just has the right ingredients and everybody loves it. So I think right now people want to laugh. They don't want to be sad. And it's not a stupid play. It's a really intelligent play. And I think also in terms of Shakespeare, I think teachers need to take their students to live Shakespeare. And I think that could be very, very helpful. It's one thing reading it on the page and discussing in a classroom, but it really comes to life if people go see Shakespeare. And I think that's very important. And when you have a show about Shakespeare, Shakespeare's name means something, but it's not for everybody because a lot of people don't understand it and they should be plumbers and electricians, and we need those people too. But we need to groom people, as I said earlier, young people to love theater. And a lot of the young people have lots and lots of money. I will say down in Washington, D.C., they do have a Shakespeare company down there, and it does very, very well. And your boyfriend, Michael Urie, was also down in Shakespeare in Washington. And, you know, I think that the money is there. The young people have money. We just have to make them love theater. And that's the answer. Unless
I'll throw out one more question. We're already at 10 o'clock, so we're at the end of our hour, but I'll throw out one more question before we wrap it up for the evening. You mentioned that there's Shakespeare out there and people should go see it. It seems to me like in New York City, we don't have, as you say, in Washington, D.C., Pat, we don't have one central theater like the Shakespeare Theater at D.C. that is the single place where all the Shakespeare gets done. But in New York City, we do have Shakespeare in the Park, which is more or less the center of gravity of Shakespeare in New York. And there are so many other Shakespeare productions that happen around it, especially in the summer. Is it that Shakespeare in the Park is the end all and be all that defines Shakespeare in New York, especially in the summer season? Or is it that you can produce Shakespeare elsewhere that can have such a pull that it can be as powerful as Shakespeare in New York, as the Shakespeare in the Park elsewhere, if you have the right star, if you have, as Stewart would say, all the right elements, all the right hedges to the right director, the right above the title star, the right whatever the case is. Can that happen, or is Shakespeare in the Park too much of a embodiment of what New York Shakespeare is all about?
We said Broadway works with Shakespeare, as I said, with certain formulas. Shakespeare in the Park is for free. That makes a big difference right there.
Yep.
Right? I mean, so it's affordable to everyone if you're willing to wait online for it. You know, Broadway, you know, people cost money, stars cost money, productions cost. Al Pacino doesn't work for free. Denzel doesn't work for free. Although, you know, they love, the fact that they came back to the stage shows how they love it. You know, being on stage means that you have the acting chops. You can make money in movies, you can have a TV series, but to be able to sustain a character for 2.5 hours on stage, that takes real talent. And a lot of actors come to New York and take pay cuts just to be able to do that. So Shakespeare has that kind of balance. Did you see the Mark Rylance production, by the way, when he did Richard III? And yeah, it was brilliant. I mean, I think it was successful. It was certainly creative, and he did a great job with it. So, you know, the answer is it's all possible. I mean, all things are possible if we do it right. If we do it right.
Okay. That's the key. I think what you were saying, Rodney, is that the key is no matter if the actor's a star or not, if you can speak trippingly, if the producers put together a group of actors who can really act, who can perform, who understand the text, who understand the history, who understand the words, who understand how to use alliteration and the caps and all of those things that you are well trained to do when you have to speak Shakespeare. If you get actors who know what they're doing and know what they're saying, then it can be off-Broadway, it can be off-Broadway, it can be on Broadway. And any company can do Shakespeare well if you have the good ingredients of a great director and a good vision and actors who can really do it and actually really can do the work. I
don't think you can make money with Shakespeare.
It's not, well, you know, I'm not talking about making the money part. I'm just talking about doing the Shakespeare.
I understand, but yeah, on Broadway, you know, to make money on Broadway, you have to have a star doing it. It's just the way it is. Whether you like it or not.
If we're talking Broadway, yes, I understand that.
That's just one of the realities of the New York, of the expenses here.
And it's never going to be a show that's going to run for a long time because no leading actor is going to give up, you know, 10 years of his or her life to be in a show. So you'd have to rotate the stars. I don't see Shakespeare as a viable thing for Broadway at the moment. That's my personal opinion. I think Off-Broadway and Harlem Shakespeare and I mean, well, you have Harlem Shakespeare, which is the only running Shakespeare, I guess, in New York besides Public Theater.
No, there's a lot of others as well. Classical Theater Harlem
not running in New York. Yeah.
No, there are some in New York. New York Classical Theater. They have do Shakespeare every year. There's many of us. Sometimes people don't know that we exist or that we're actually doing shows, whether they're free or whether they're $47, depending on where you're going to see them. But there are many companies in New York City that are producing Shakespeare.
And thus was born New York Shakespeare, our attempt to corral all the many companies that are doing Shakespeare off-Broadway, off-Broadway, Broadway and beyond. Like Nathan and Red Bull Theater and Deborah and all the wonderful things that are happening around town. Anyone else have any final comments before we go into our closing moments?
Shakespeare forever.
Shakespeare forever.
We just want to say thank you so much, New York Shakespeare. We appreciate you having us here on the panel today to have this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to our four wonderful panelists. We have Stewart Lane of many, many award-winning Broadway productions. And right now he's focusing on Broadway HD, which is a wonderful streaming online service, only $8.99 a month to get your fix of Broadway shows, past and present. We have Pat Addis of Desperate Measures the Musical and many, many other wonderful hits on Broadway.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate being on the show. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pat. Nathan Wickelstein of the Red Bull Theater. We're excited for all the things that you guys have coming up, and we can't wait to see it. Thank you, Nathan, for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking.
And Deborah Ann Bird from Harlem Shakespeare and from Becoming Othello. And Deborah has already signed off. So we thank her. We thank you all. You can, guys, with the, whoever's been watching tonight, we thank you all for joining us here tonight. I know there's so many things vying for your attention, either online or off. So I thank everyone who dedicated their time to catching the show. It will be replayed in its entirety on Facebook, on Instagram, YouTube, and elsewhere on the New York Shakespeare social media feed, so you can catch this in various locations. Once again, we thank all of our guests. Go support your local Broadway, whatever that is for you, your local Shakespeare, whatever that is for you, whether it's Broadway, off-Broadway, off-Broadway, Shakespeare in the Park, or whatever it is. Support Shakespeare, and we hope that everyone who is presenting Shakespeare in New York, at whatever level it is, do it safely and have as big an audience as they can safely have in their theaters. So thank you all again. This is Rodney Hakeem from New York Shakespeare signing off. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Rodney.